Looking at what James Cameron's actually dealing with right now, it's kind of wild how the Terminator franchise has come full circle in the weirdest way possible. Back in March, he started working on the script for Terminator 7, and you'd think after creating some of the most iconic sci-fi ever made, this would be a walk in the park for him. But here's the thing that makes this whole situation fascinating. The guy who basically predicted our AI nightmare back in '80s is now stuck because reality is moving faster than his imagination can keep up. That's not just ironic, that's borderline prophetic coming back to haunt him. Cameron admitted straight up that he's having a rough time with the writing process, and it's not because he's lost his touch or anything like that. The problem is way more fundamental. Every time he sits down to write something that feels futuristic and threatening, he opens the news and sees headlines about AI developments that are either matching or straight up surpassing what he's trying to dream up. When you're trying to scare audiences with killer robots and self-aware machines, but OpenAI is dropping new models every few months and everyone's genuinely worried about AI alignment, what do you even write? The man literally said he can't figure out what to put in the script that won't be overtaken by actual real-world events. We're living in the science fiction era he imagined 4 decades ago, and now he's got to somehow stay ahead of it again. Think about the contrast here. In 1984, when the first Terminator dropped, the concept of a self-aware AI was this distant, almost laughable threat to most people. Yeah, computer scientists were thinking about it, but to regular moviegoers, it was pure fantasy. Skynet becoming sentient and launching nuclear weapons seemed about as realistic as flying cars. Fast forward to now, and we've got legitimate researchers warning about existential risks from AI, tech CEOs debating whether we should slow down development, and autonomous weapon systems that are already being deployed in actual conflicts. Cameron's fictional nightmare scenario isn't fiction anymore, and that's making his job incredibly difficult. What's even more interesting is how this connects to what Cameron actually wants to do with the reboot. He's made it crystal clear, this isn't going to be another half-hearted sequel trying to please everyone. This is a full reset starting completely fresh. During the 40th anniversary interview with Empire magazine, he basically said they need to throw out everything the franchise has been dragging around for 4 decades. And honestly, that's probably the only move that makes sense at this point. The timeline is so mangled after Genesis and Dark Fate that even hardcore fans need a flowchart to explain what's canon and what isn't. Here's where Cameron's vision gets really compelling though. He's not just rebooting for the sake of rebooting. The new film is supposed to center on completely powerless protagonists. Not soldiers, not resistance fighters with inside knowledge, just regular people trying to survive in a world where every institution they'd normally turn to for help is compromised. Government, infrastructure, communication networks, everything runs on AI, which means everything is potentially hostile. The characters will be fighting to maintain their humanity while navigating a society where the basic structures of civilization are working against them. That's a genuinely fresh angle for the franchise, and it taps into anxieties we're all feeling right now about how dependent we've become on technology we don't fully understand or control. The whole setup feels like Cameron looked at our current relationship with AI and asked what happens when that goes sideways. Not in some distant future, but in a world that looks a lot like ours. No time travel safety net, no future knowledge to guide you, just ordinary people realizing too late that they've built the infrastructure of their own destruction. If he pulls this off, it could actually justify calling it Terminator again, instead of just another disposable action franchise entry. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Arnold Schwarzenegger is not coming back. Cameron confirmed it, and honestly, this is the right call even though it stings a little. The T-800 story is done. Dark Fate in 2019 was essentially Arnold's farewell to the character, and while that movie had its moments, it also proved that just having Schwarzenegger show up isn't enough to save the franchise anymore. His presence has become more symbolic than functional at this point. Cameron even acknowledged this by saying Arnold's portrayal is so iconic that bringing him back endlessly would only dilute what made the character legendary in the first place. Better to end on a high note than turn into a shadow of former glory. This also signals something crucial about Cameron's approach. He's not interested in fan service for its own sake. He's not going to parade out familiar faces just to trigger nostalgia. The entire point of this reboot is to prove that Terminator can exist without relying on what made it famous in the 80s and 90s. That's a huge risk, but it's also the only way forward. The franchise has been spinning its wheels for years trying to balance nostalgia with innovation, and it's failed every single time. Genesis made almost $500 million globally despite mixed reviews, largely because Arnold was back. But then Dark Fate crashed and burned as the 6th installment, while somehow also trying to be a direct sequel to Judgment Day. The timeline became impossible to follow, and audiences just stopped caring. Cameron knows the franchise hit a wall. Even with his involvement in recent projects as a producer and script consultant, it wasn't enough. Multiple outlets wrote Terminator off as a dead franchise that would never recapture its peak. But here's the thing about writing off franchises. Nobody expected Alien to make the comeback it did. Nobody thought Predator could be relevant again. With the right creative vision and the right execution, any IP can be resurrected. And the themes of Terminator feel more urgent now than they did in decades. The fear of machines replacing us, of AI making decisions beyond our control, of technology turning hostile. These aren't abstract sci-fi concepts anymore. They're debates happening in boardrooms and Congress right now. That relevance is exactly why Cameron thinks a full reboot will work. Judgment Day can stay as a vague reference point, something that happened or might happen, but the new story doesn't need to be chained to it. Fresh actors, new characters, updated visuals, modern filmmaking techniques. Everything gets rebuilt from scratch. What has to remain is the core concept that made Judgment Day one of the greatest sequels ever made. Cameron nailed the formula in 1991 by building on what worked in the original, ramping up the action, and filling the cast with top-tier talent. He clearly wants to apply that same philosophy here, which is why he's personally taking control of the script instead of just lending his name. The production timeline tells you everything about how serious this is. Cameron started on the script back in March, but don't expect to see Terminator 7 anytime soon. We're probably not getting this before 2028 at the earliest, maybe even later depending on how development goes. The studio and creative team need time to completely reconstruct the story and the world from the ground up. That's not a bad thing though. Rushing is what killed Dark Fate and Genesis. Taking the time to get it right is the only way this reboot stands a chance. Meanwhile, Cameron's also juggling the Avatar franchise, which is still demanding massive amounts of his attention. Plus, he's working on Ghosts of Hiroshima. That's a World War II film based on Charles Pellegrino's book about atomic bomb survivors, and Cameron called it potentially the most challenging project of his entire career. It's his first work outside the Avatar universe in nearly 3 decades. So yeah, the guy is not exactly sitting around with nothing to do, which makes his commitment to Terminator even more notable. There's also the question of where Terminator Zero fits into all this. The Netflix anime explored new storylines set in 1997 and 2022, mixing original characters with familiar franchise elements. But whether it's actually canon in this rebooted timeline is completely unclear. Until Cameron or Netflix makes an official statement, Zero exists in this weird limbo state. It could be part of the new continuity, it could be its own thing, or it could end up being quietly ignored. We'll have to wait and see how the studio decides to handle it. What makes Cameron's current struggle so fascinating is that it's not a creative problem in the traditional sense. He's not out of ideas or burned out. The issue is that the world has caught up to and possibly surpassed his vision. He admitted that writing science fiction in general has become difficult for him, not just Terminator. The guy who once imagined Skynet as a distant dystopian threat is now living in a world where AI development is happening so fast that yesterday's speculation is today's reality. His old fictional scenarios turned out to be prophetic rather than fantastical. And now he has to somehow get ahead of the curve again. That's a hell of a challenge, but if anyone can pull it off, it's Cameron. The man has a track record of pushing boundaries and proving doubters wrong. Whether this reboot actually delivers remains to be seen, but the ambition is there. A powerless cast fighting AI-controlled systems, no safety net, no familiar faces to fall back on, just pure survival horror in a world that looks uncomfortably close to our own. If Cameron can translate our current AI anxieties into a compelling Terminator story that feels both timely and timeless, this franchise might actually have a future. And honestly, after years of disappointments, that possibility alone makes Terminator 7 worth paying attention to.